name's Helen Murray. Thank you for joining today. I'm really sorry for the late start. I thought we had started it and we haven't. So we're going to start again. So first of all, the meeting's recorded. So if anybody needs to leave or wants to check back with anything later, then it will be recorded and it'll be on our YouTube channel. This is the third in a series of webinars that Karen has delivered for us, who's our certified menopause champion. And again, you can look back on the YouTube channel to see the previous recordings. I'm going to share a link at the end and during the session where you can complete feedback. Please feel free to give negative feedback around it not starting on time, because that is completely my fault. And also just so we can gauge what you think about the webinars and whether we can put any on in future as well. So we'll get going with that now, and we'll try and catch up as much as I can. I'm really sorry about that again. So off you go, Karen.
Okay, no problem. I'll try and condense this if I can, Helen. So we've got time at the end for questions if I can. And it gave me 8 minutes of practice before we actually started live. So apologies everyone, we started a bit late, but let's crack on. So this training is about menopause champions, and it fits into the series really well because we've talked about leaders, we've talked about empowering people within the workplace. One of the key things that makes menopause work in the workplace is having champions around, and that's what this training is all about. But first, I often start with this slide, and if you've been before, you might have seen it previously, is this thing about menopause mayhem, kind of the conversations around menopause. It's so prevalent, and there is so much media attention in the press, on TV, on social media about menopause in the workplace, menopause in relationships, the role of doctors in prescribing HRT, which one day is the worst thing that you can possibly take because it'll give you breast cancer, and then the next minute it's the best thing and you're an idiot if you don't take HRT. So there's so much conflicting advice around there, and we get stories from celebrities who have become experts like Davina McCall. We've got experts who have become celebrities like Dr. Louise Newsom there at the top. We've got celebrities like Emma Neville and Lorraine Kelly who are giving us their stories around menopause, which is all great, but their story is exactly that. It's not relevant to everybody. So making sure that we have the right education, awareness and support out there is really important. Saturday was Menopause Awareness Day, and the whole month of October has been devoted to menopause. So that's made me really busy, which is a good thing. The only problem I have with that is, menopause isn't a one-day event. It's not something that workplaces should just focus on for one day or 1 month of the year. It's there all the time and it's affecting people all the time, and we need to acknowledge that. So why does menopause and menopause champions actually matter in the workplace? And I have put these slides up before for anyone who's been in any of these webinars, but they're really important to just get a grasp of the impact of menopause. So 23% of the workforce in the UK is female, aged 50 to 64. So that's the latter end of menopause, almost a quarter. Almost a half of the female workforce is age 45 plus. So half of the female workforce is going through menopause. 28% of leadership roles, and this number is growing, are held by women who either are or will at some point in the future be going through menopause. And in certain sectors, it's even more prevalent. So I'm guessing it's the same in practices, but in the care sector, 6% of roles are held by menopausal aged women. So we need to look after these people. And it impacts workplaces significantly. 1 in 10 women have left their roles due to symptoms and a lack of support. And I hold hands up and say, I was one of them. And that's why I do what I do now. And 1 in 4 women have considered doing so. So they're suffering in silence. Cost of businesses is massive, and the demographic of women going through menopause is only increasing. The figure of 1.2 billion worldwide is kind of irrelevant, other than the fact that it's growing because of longer living ages, an increase in female demographics, and an increase in women working and working longer. So menopause isn't going away, and it's something that we really need to get a grip of in the workplace. And workplaces need champions like me, like you, because 47% of women are taking time off due to menopause, and they didn't tell the employees why. 1 in 10 have left, as I've just said, and 76% of workplaces have no formal support. So women are suffering in silence and unnecessarily. 63% of women have said that their working life has been negatively affected. And 75% of women have experienced some kind of symptom that's had an impact on performance. And if you're a woman who has to have some kind of medical intervention for menopause symptoms, then the average number of days taken off is 32, and that's massive. So the answer is fixing it, not just letting it run by us. And for workplaces, so if you're a leader or responsible for the bottom line of a practice or a workplace, 40 million days are lost due to menopause every year in the UK. If you lose an employee earning, say, 25,000, the cost of replacing that employee is 30,000. And tribunals are up by about 44%, and that number will increase as more legislation comes in place protecting women in the workplace. And that's like to happen at the end of next year, when there will actually be legislation going through Parliament again, like to get passed this time, that will make menopause a legal obligation for workplaces over a certain size. So it's really, really important that we have people in the workplace who are championing menopause for the kind of social obligation of making sure the workforce are okay, but also the bottom line in terms of productivity and performance. So that's why workplaces need champions. We understand that now. So by the end of this webinar, you'll know what a menopause champion is, but also how to start making conversations around menopause and making small but lasting change for you, for yourself, for your colleagues, and for your workplace. So we're going to talk about what a menopause champion is. We'll do some top line stuff on menopause education and awareness so that you can perform the role of a menopause champion with some knowledge and some credibility. We'll look at some practical solutions that you can enable putting in place to help menopausal women. And we'll also look at engaging employees and leadership, which is sometimes perceived as the most difficult part. Is how do I get people to buy into this and to get on board? So that's what we're going to do. For those of you who haven't met before, my name's Karen, and as Helen said, I'm a licensed menopause champion, educated and trained by a company called the Menopause Experts Group, who gave my formal education and also give me ongoing updates, access to experts where we need them, and all the latest research. From my training, I've set up my Menopause method, which the name speaks for itself. I'm trying to make menopause more positive and something to embrace and take into the second stage of our lives. I'm a coach and a trainer for both workplaces and for women individually. Right, so let's start properly. What is a menopause champion? So formally, a menopause champion is someone who is the named trained person to offer guidance and support for menopause. It's somebody who acts as a kind of a friendly and approachable contact for people either going through a menopause or their colleagues. They provide a really important role as a bridge between those employees and the HR or wellbeing teams or leadership teams. So they're kind of like a bridge that make it easier for communication to pass. They're the people who will share appropriate information and then signpost to support or resources, whether that's inside the company or practice or external resources, the NHS websites, the Menopause Society, things that Thornfields could give you, things that I could give you, having that signpost resources. And they're there to help raise awareness and just normalise the conversations around menopause, to guide, listen and encourage. So that's what it's formally. However, I'll be honest, I have a slightly different view on menopause champions because not all organisations are set up, certainly in 2025, to have formal menopause champions in place. And sometimes, at its best, the menopause champion is more about a mindset. It's more about embodying menopause. It's anybody who actually understands a bit about menopause and cares enough to talk about it. It's anybody who can build awareness and have empathy. It's the person that encourages open and supportive conversations and helps other people who may be not so confident and not as aware to feel seen and understood and give them the confidence to talk to other people. And it's not about being a big role and being the person who stands up in meetings and talks about menopause. It's the person who takes small practical actions to help individuals and to speak to line managers and leaders that can make a big difference, because it's these small conversations that can make a menopause culture and make menopause something that is okay to talk about, and it's okay to start bringing things in, little changes and accommodations that will change the lives of women going through menopause. So that's my take on menopause. So in truth, a menopause champion could be that formally trained person. It could be a line manager who's just cared enough and is educated enough to listen and make small adjustments that will help women and start the conversations. It could be Jill from accounts or whoever from whatever department, somebody who's been through it and really cares and talks about it. Or it could be you, because you've had some training, you've sat in this webinar, you've sat in some of the previous webinars, and you're a person who's prepared to show empathy and help make a difference. So it's not about necessarily a big title and a big role and something that is really time consuming and requires lots of training. It's about caring enough to help and make a difference. So does that make sense? It's kind of like it can be formal, but it can also be very informal. A champion can be just somebody who cares and empathizes. And what do these people, whichever route they come from, do in practice? Well, the menopause champions actually bring support to life through simple everyday actions that aren't that difficult to do. You start the conversations. So you know somebody who may be perimenopausal, you just ask them how they are. You listen without judgment. You share this information and resources. As I said, it can come from anywhere. It can be through the company intranet. It can be something that you've downloaded off the NHS website. It could be something that's provided by Thornfields. It's just giving people that access to information so that they can learn about what might be going on and what they can do. If there's a workplace policy, help them with that. It's about encouraging colleagues and menopause women to look after themselves, and we'll talk about self-advocacy and looking after yourself and owning your own menopause a bit later on. But it's about saying these are some things that you can do to help look after yourself. And then it's about helping managers and other teams to understand the impact of menopause and why menopause is important, not just from an obligatory point of view, but actually from a performance point of view within the workplace. So that's what you could do in practice. It's about making menopause visible, approachable, and just becoming part of the everyday conversations. I always say it's a bit like mental health. 10 years ago, no one talked about mental health in the workplace, and now it's a very normal thing to do. And menopause needs to become the same and be as easy to talk about. So, beacons for menopause, you could be a formal champion or you could be an informal champion. Both are important, and depending on the size of your company or practice, one or both may be relevant. But what really matters is that the menopause champion drives awareness, that the menopause champion is credible. It's somebody who can talk about menopause and understands it. It's someone who listens and is empathetic. Probably most importantly, they're solution focused. So this isn't about whinging about menopause. It's not about poor old us. It's having solutions and putting the support in place to make sure that accommodations are made and people can live and work better through menopause. And it's about allyship. So we're all in this together. As women, we're all in it together, but we can also bring men in. And if we educate them properly and give them the awareness, they are there to support us as well. So that's what matters. And the starting point of a champion's role, to enable them to support others, is having the solid knowledge and empathy. And that starts with education. So understanding about menopause is the first part. So that takes us on to part 2 of this webinar, which is education and awareness. So what is menopause? For those who haven't been on one of these before, menopause is the natural biological process that marks the end of our reproductive years. It's the end of menstrual periods, which is driven by a significant decrease in key hormones, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it's that decrease in hormones that drive the range of physical, emotional, and mental changes and symptoms that we experience as women. I'm quite simple, so put it another way, your eggs stop, your hormones drop, and bang, your symptoms kick in, and that's what happens. It's important to remember and to spread the word that menopause isn't about age, it's about hormones. It's not about age because it doesn't mean that you're old and past it. And it's also not about age because menopause can actually start as early as 30, and 35 is quite common, but definitely by 40. So this isn't something that happens to women in the 50s. It can be happening from the 30s onwards. So it's definitely not about age. It's all about hormones. And a quick word about hormones, because while I don't want this to be a biology lesson, it's important that you understand what hormones are and how they are impacting women going through menopause. So hormones are chemical messengers that regulate key bodily functions. So it's not just about reproductive growth, reproductive processes and getting pregnant. It's about general growth. It's about your brain. It's about your muscles and joints. It's about your metabolism, emotions, sleep, stress, heart, go on and on and on. Hormones affect every part of your body, which is why the symptoms can be so severe. They are the boss. So during menopause, as the hormones dip, the hormones play a crucial role in the symptoms, which are the physical and emotional changes that occur. And these occur across 3 stages: perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. Now, perimenopause is the 5 to 10 year where most things are going on. Estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are declining at a very erratic rate, and that's when the symptoms kick. And that's the most challenging stage. When women say, I'm menopausal, I've got all these symptoms, they're probably perimenopausal. Menopause itself is actually only one day. It's the day that marks 12 months exactly since the last menstrual bleed. So it's just one day that is just a line in the sand that says, I was perimenopausal, now I've hit menopause. And that tends to be why it's the umbrella term for all 3. Postmenopause is the rest of life. You never not postmenopausal once you've hit it. Your hormones stay low unless you're artificially increasing them with HRT, and therefore symptoms may persist. For some women, they don't. For other women, they do. So it's not, postmenopause doesn't mean it's all finished. It still needs managing. So eggs stop, hormones drop, symptoms hit. Let's have a quick look at those symptoms. I was taught there were 34 symptoms of menopause. Turns out there's 100 plus. And it's important to remember, you know, as a woman going through menopause, or as a leader or a colleague, that 25% of women will get no symptoms or very few symptoms. 50% will get moderate symptoms, and the poor 25% will get severe debilitating symptoms, which can have a huge impact on your personal and professional life. Everyone's experience is unique, depending on genetics, lifestyle, medication, age, culture. There's lots of things. So one size doesn't fit all. So everyone's experience is different, and that's really important in the workplace and as a champion to be able to acknowledge that. Let's just look at some of the symptoms, and we haven't got too long to go through them all. And if you're a woman going through it, you'll recognize some of these and say, hey, there's loads more. But just look at those and just imagine you're in the workplace and you've got a hot flash, you've not slept, and you've got unpredictable periods that are hitting you at all times. That is going to affect you at work and needs some kind of accommodation. That's the physical symptoms. And then there are emotional symptoms, which can be symptoms themselves due to declining estrogen. So anxiety can increase because estrogen affects cortisol, which can make you more anxious. Or there can be symptoms of symptoms. So you have a really bad night's sleep, which makes you stressed for the next day at work, or irritable for the next day at work. So there can be symptoms of as well. But similarly, just think about, you know, a woman in your workplace who is anxious, she's lost her self-confidence and maybe prone to panic attacks. That's going to affect her in the workplace and colleagues around her. There are long-term health risks of perimenopause as well, on your heart, on your bone, and your type 2 diabetes, depression, and cognitive decline. So that needs to be thought about in your own self-advocacy to fix your perimenopause and menopause symptoms, but also how that might impact in the workplace. And menopause shows up at work, so those symptoms we've just talked about, it doesn't arrive with a label. It shows up as low energy, poor sleep, missed deadlines, disappearing confidence, little slips of memory, rising anxiety. It might come across as burnout or poor performance. And the worst thing that can happen is when women have to hide it or take time off, or worse. So there's lots of things that demonstrate how menopause might be affecting people in the workplace. And the experience of women is really different. So yes, we have symptoms, but you might also feel invisible or isolated or frustrated or overwhelmed or embarrassed or resigned. It's not just those symptoms that are directly related to hormones. But I want you also to remember that if we get this right, if we get the right education and awareness and support out there, it can actually be a real crossroads and make women more resilient, more determined, liberated and hopeful going forward. I've put up here some quotes that I've taken directly from women going through menopause in the workplace, and I've highlighted a couple of them. Read them now or when you get the copy of this presentation. But this is proof that it does really affect women in the workplace. Dealing with insomnia is the worst. I'm exhausted all the time and it makes it hard to stay productive. I worry that people think I'm less capable. That's such a common fear that people tell me. And the one at the bottom, I'm sick of all the fuss. I went through the change without all the drama. So those people also need educating as well. So the menopause experience is different and it affects everybody. But we need to remember that these colleagues are also, these women are also talented, qualified and experienced. They're still ambitious and hardworking. They're probably more flexible than they've ever been because the kids have gone to school and their aging parents may have passed. They've got more time on their hands. They're more resilient and they are teachers and mentors for the next generation. So we need to look after them. So that leads on to practical solutions. If you're a menopause champion, how can you help put practical solutions into the workplace? So there's obviously workplace support, and I know I've talked about this in previous webinars, but I'm going to bring into this webinar the issue of self-advocacy as well, because I think it's really, really important. So workplace support is the thing that your workplace or practice put in place. And as a menopause champion, you can help this because it encompasses some practical changes. It encompasses empowering women, making sure that colleagues are empathetic and aware, and making sure that leadership is educated. So there are 5 levels of workplace solutions: policy, adjustments, support systems, training, culture and communication. Now, I'm not suggesting that as a menopause champion, you have to drive all of these, but you can certainly impact and be part of it. So a menopause policy is usually down to the organisation, but there's no reason why you can't go to a line manager or the wellbeing department and say, we need a menopause policy, if you haven't already got one. If you have got one, then it's about making sure that that is communicated to people in the organisation and they know that it's there and it's a living document, rather than just being a document that's sat in the drawer. Workplace adjustments. Now here you can have a really big impact as a menopause champion because you can see in your workplace the things that, 1, would impact menopausal women, and 2, that are actually doable for your organisation, whether that's open windows, open spaces and air conditioning, whether it's having a rest and quiet room, whether it's having water availability, uniform accommodations, flexible working. Is that something that's doable in your organisation? If it is, then you can put that forward. Adjusting workloads and the creation of a comfort cupboard. This is where, as a menopause champion, you can have the biggest impact in your organisation. Setting up a little comfort cupboard or a box or a drawer or under someone's desk that contains all the products and support that a menopausal woman might need, be that sanitary products, a black cardigan for those awful unexpected bleeds, fans, symptom trackers to help people understand and educate themselves, wipes or sprays, deodorant, hygiene products, pain relief, cooling peppermint teas or bars of chocolate or whatever it may be. Having the provision of that, in my experience of the dozens of companies that I've gone and trained, is probably the biggest thing that will have an impact on the performance and acceptance of menopause in the workplace. So as a menopause champion, that's something that you can absolutely encourage and drive. Support systems is maybe something you need to liaise with HR or wellbeing or leadership on, but having menopause support group once a month or once a quarter, having the ability for people to check in and just explain what might be going on so everything's up to date. Communication campaigns, which could be in Menopause Awareness Month or could be any time of the year. Driving extended training, speak to HR, about that. And then having a menopause safe word is a really good support system. So if somebody is feeling unwell or having a horrible bleed, just having a word that may be red or code or help that they can say, and everybody knows that that's what's happening, and they can exit the workplace. Things like that, whatever works for your practice or workplace, just making sure that support is there. Training is more difficult as a menopause champion, but just having an awareness that training exists and asking for more training for either women, for colleagues, or for leadership. Use your role as a champion to advocate for more training. The more educated people are, the better the outcomes for both women and the organisation. And then just building a menopause empowering culture. That sounds a bit kind of like, convoluted, but basically using the right language. Jokes usually don't go down well. Visibility, just making sure that menopause is visible in the organisation. Trust is really big, and a menopause champion is usually having a menopause champion in a practice or a workplace is the thing that builds the trust, because women think, actually, this is real. This isn't just a tick box. This company actually cares about menopause. Flexibility, consistency. So making sure that happens all the time. It's not just one campaign and then it goes back in the drawer, because culture is the thing that people feel and relate to. That trust is created by the people who are talking about menopause. So that's menopause solutions in the workplace and the support that the workplace can give. But menopause support and effective menopause solutions are not just down to the workplace or the practice. The best people to drive the best outcomes for menopause are women, are us, ourselves. Making sure that we have the right knowledge, that we own our menopause, that we self-advocate for our menopause and don't just sit back and let the workplace train everybody else around us to look after us, and having that allyship to talk to other women, obviously backed up by visible menopause support in the workplace. But I so strongly believe that actually it's down to us. And I sometimes get pulled up for this, so I've now called it my unpopular opinion. But if we can't help ourselves, we can't expect help from our employers or practice. I'm not saying we have to do it all ourselves, but first of all, we have to know ourselves how to manage our own menopause. And optimal outcomes occur when we champion our own menopause wellness and our performance. And then we can ask for the support that we need. So that's about self-advocacy, is about accepting what's happening, educating ourselves or getting educated on menopause. So either learn yourself or asking for education from your practice or workplace so that you're more aware, and then finding solutions which are driven by habits, consistency, a little bit of patience, and being realistic. So let's just look at those solutions. So if you want to look after your own menopause, or I want to look after my own menopause, there are three solutions. There are three levels of support and solutions that we can look at. Number one, we can just grin and bear it. And 20 years ago, that's what our mothers and grandmothers would have done. They'd have done nothing. They'd just muddled through. They'd live with the overwhelm. They'd live with the symptoms. They probably would have been sat at home, to be honest, so it didn't matter so much. And possibly look for quick fixes. So, nowadays, people who grin and bear it might go online and find the magic supplement or go on a 6-week reset. But basically, you're just putting up with it. And they're the women who sit in the office, moan about menopause and do nothing to fix it and expect the workplace to support them. The second solution is medical fixes. Now, this can be absolutely brilliant. HRT, MHT as it's called now, and there are other medical options that are available, from antidepressants to gabapentin. There are lots that are available. HRT, I'm neither an advocate or anti-HRT, but HRT is a brilliant solution for many women for some of the symptoms of menopause. And I would advise anybody who is approaching menopause or perimenopause age, who may be suffering symptoms, to educate themselves fully on the pros and cons of HRT so that you can decide whether or not that's the solution for you. And for many women, it has huge impact. So that's great. However, whether you're on HRT or not, the best way to fix your menopause is to educate yourself on lifestyle fixes, which include nutrition, movement and exercise, rest and recuperation, and stress management. And these are things that I'm not talking about a 6-week reset or a 5-day diet or, a magical supplement that's going to fix all your symptoms. This is about making small tweaks to your lifestyle for good that will have a lasting impact on both your symptoms and your long-term midlife health. And the pillars of health, are nutrition. So that's about changing the way you eat, making sure that you're eating nutrient-dense whole foods. There are certain key groups, there are 8 key groups of foods that a midlife woman needs to have in her diet every single day to make sure that she's managing her hormones, looking after her bone health, looking after her brain health, looking after her heart health, and setting her up for long-term health at the same time as a reduction in symptoms. So this isn't about diet, it's about changes. We'll look at movement and exercise. This isn't about a quick 8-week cardio training plan. This is about changing the way we exercise as midlife women, which involves lots of strength training, a different approach to cardio, which is more about walking and steady state cardio rather than high intensity cardio. It's about looking at yoga and mobility training, and it's about moving our bodies more generally. So that's really important. Rest is about sleep, and sleep is one of the worst symptoms of menopause that women say to me, is the inability to get to sleep, stay asleep and have quality sleep. But rest is also about doing nothing, about taking time out, about having hobbies, about reading, listening to music, and just resting your body and your mind from those stresses of everyday life and making sure that you're optimally set up for good health. And that leads on to stress. So stress is a big worldwide pandemic, but it affects us more as midlife women because cortisol is being affected by the lack of estrogen. So stress, we deal with stress less well. So the whole process of stress management, accepting stress and then finding ways to manage it is really important. So those pillars all work together. And I put it up on this presentation for this webinar because it's a really important part as a menopause champion formally, as a menopause champion informally, and as a menopausal woman, is that we look at ways of fixing our own menopause so that we can go into the workplace as able as possible to manage our symptoms and to work and live as effectively as possible. Okay, so going back to support and solutions, the best outcomes for menopause, both for women personally and in the workplace, occur when self-advocacy, that's managing and understanding our own menopause, is combined with workplace support. So, that's why I put the unpopular opinion up. Yes, workplace support is so important, but we can do a lot of this ourselves and make sure we're fit and healthy for work going forward. So we've talked about what Menopause Champion is. We understand a little bit about what's going on in menopause, and we know what some of the support and solutions are that we need. How do we get people to engage? And very often people come to me and say, I'd love to be a menopause champion, but leadership isn't that keen. I'd love to be a menopause champion, but women are poo-pooing it. So how do we actually get that engagement? Being a menopause champion is about starting the conversations. That's your first job, whether it's formal or informal, is starting to get the conversation about menopause at the top of the agenda. It's about understanding who you're talking to. So it's leaders have a view, colleagues need awareness, and women themselves that are in the workplace around you. Know your why, because if you've got a story to tell, you know why menopause support matters to you, and that is so compelling. When I tell my story in presentations, that's the most compelling bit of the day because it makes it relevant. My story becomes relevant to other people, and then they're prepared to share their stories. Just start with small conversations. You don't need a big campaign. You don't need to start high up, saying this is what we're going to do, and this is why menopause is so important. Just start having little conversations so it becomes the norm. And focus on being empathetic. You don't need to be the expert. You don't need to have all the answers about menopause. You don't need to know HRT solutions inside and out. You can find those resources or training elsewhere. Just be empathetic and have the conversations, and just start. How do you get leadership on board? Leadership or practice managers? Keep it simple and have a reason. Know about the impact on productivity, retention, and well-being. The facts that we started this webinar with. Link menopause to existing priorities. So whether that's well-being, inclusion, performance, diversity, whatever it is, link it to something that's already going on there, because it will get more buy-in. Share feedback or examples from your team. So if there's been a lady who's had some experience and taken some days off, use that, or use your own experience so that it's real and it's relevant to the workplace. Don't ask for everything all at once. Ask for one small action, so it's very doable and it's very cost effective. The comfort cupboard is a great one, or a little workshop or a menopause cafe where people can come and talk about it. And make sure you recognise any visible support, so that it's recognised as something that's been valuable and it builds momentum. So just be simple. This doesn't need to be massive. It can be really simple. How do you engage men and other colleagues? Honestly, sometimes I find these easy people to get involved, because they're so curious, and every man in the workplace has a wife, mother, sister who's got some kind of experience. So approach this engagement and ask questions and be open. Use empathy, even humour sometimes where it's appropriate to break the ice. Give little bite-sized facts that make it relevant. So about brain fog or anxiety or loss of confidence. Ask them to come into a session just to talk about it, but make it safe. Emphasize this thing about allyship and sharing stuff. Menopause isn't just about the women, it's about the impact on teams and the broader productivity of the business or practice. And let them ask questions. Men have so many questions that they want answering. Let them ask them, and then they start to understand what might be going on and how they can help. They want to help, but they just don't know how. And then how do we engage other women? And I'll be dead honest, sometimes this is the most difficult group of people to engage, because there are so many different views and opinions and experience of menopause, and everyone has a view, but it's totally doable. So as a menopause champion, I would go in with empathy rather than being the expert, because that can kind of wind people up and make an us and them type scenario. So it's just, yeah, I'm one of you, I've been there too. Share your story. If that's comfortable to you, share your story, because that will make people share their story. The more stories we share, the more it becomes real and the more we find solutions. Find quiet places to chat, have a chat over the lunch break, or, ask for a specific menopause cafe where you can just sit in a room and talk about it and decide what you want as a group of women for your organisation or practice. Give practical help, how to talk to managers, how to track your symptoms, how to talk to your GP, how to access support. And if anybody wants any of that kind of thing, we can share it via Thornfields. And then make sure you've just got some resources and self-help training, or bring some resources in. It's about trust. Once someone trusts that you're the person to help them, then engagement will follow naturally. So they're the three groups. That's how you start. How do you keep going? My honest advice is don't think big. Think about something that is an everyday part of the culture. Talk about menopause little and often, every day. Link it to the well-being topics, as I mentioned earlier. Encourage managers to check in regularly. So just say, let's talk about menopause. Don't identify individual women, but just have it as part of the conversations. Mental health, ADHD, autism, menopause is just a topic, like many other topics. And let people share the stories and small wins, so you get a comfort cupboard going. That's a small, massive win. You have a little bit of training, you access new resources, share those wins so it becomes real. Once we start making people aware, we get empathy, and then that empathy will lead to action. And those, it's like a snowball effect. So the little things that we do at the beginning snowball into something much bigger. And that, I've done quite well there. That's pretty much it. That's the 4 topics that we've covered. We've looked at what the role is of a menopause champion. You can be formal, or you can just be a menopause advocate in the workplace. We've looked a little bit of menopause education and awareness, and I'm really conscious that education piece is a whistle-stop tour through menopause and its impacts. And, you know, if anyone wants any more education along those lines, I'm sure it's something that we can work with Thornfields and provide in the future, because that's the bit around the self-advocacy of menopause. We've looked at the practical solutions, both through the workplace and what your workplace can be doing, and what we as women can be doing to find solutions for ourselves. And we've touched on how to engage employees and leadership, so that as a menopause champion, you can make a difference in your workplace. Just quickly before we finish, excuse me, quick checklist. If you fancy the role of a champion, start the conversation. Those small chats make a big change. Involve leaders from the beginning, but make it sound small. Link that support to something that's already important to them. Include everybody. Everybody in the organisation is impacted by menopausal women having a bad experience. So speak to men, speak to managers, and speak to colleagues, as well as other women. Those small wins and stories is what keep the momentum alive and make people confident to talk about it. And just be visible. Talking about menopause, your own symptoms, somebody else, those chats. You know, when I went through menopause, I didn't talk about it to anybody, and that was the biggest mistake that I made. So I would advise anybody, whether you're a formal or just an informal champion, just talk about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and the more we talk about it, the better the outcomes. And for your next steps, just reflect on what I've said. Is there anything that you can do to have an impact? Then go into your workplace or practice and find allies, other people who will help you talk about this and get this moving. Share what we've talked about today and just see who else is up for this. And then act by just thinking about small practical steps that can create lasting impact. Further training is always available. So menopause for leaders, awareness workshops, menopause in the workplace for women, that education piece I've talked about, accredited champion training, whatever is relevant for your workplace. Or if you just need access to appropriate resources, just speak to Helen and the team, and we can make sure, you know, we give you links to the appropriate websites and social media handles that will help, that you can share with people in your workplace. Menopause is all about awareness, education, advocacy, finding solutions, and the right support. And I apologise if you've seen this before, but it's my favourite slide. Remember, it's the eggs that expire, not the hen. There is so much more to go at. Menopause isn't the end, both from a career point of view and a personal point of view. We just need to find the right solutions. That's me done. Any questions?
Thank you, Karen. Thanks everybody, and thanks. So we haven't had any questions in the chat, but I wondered if anybody wanted to either put anything in the chat now or share any experiences that they've had. I mean, the prime example of brain fog and absolutely not knowing what on earth's going on is what happened at the start of that session for me there. So we were 10 minutes in before I realised I hadn't pressed start, and oh, I'm so embarrassed and flustered, but anyway, we've got through it. So, you know, it does happen in real life, and I'm sure, you know, a lot of you are going through similar things. So if anybody's got anything they'd like to ask, please feel free to pop it in the chat. What I wanted to ask as well, does anybody know or not know whether they have a menopause in the workplace policy at the practice? Because like Karen said, you know, staff might not know if they've got one, if there's one they can refer to, or you might not have one. Would anybody like to add in the chat anything about a policy there? Nobody's taken anything. Okay, well, the reason that I mention is because if you're first practice management members, then, you know, obviously as part of your FPM core software, you can access that policy there. Obviously, it's there to make use of and to adapt for your practice and your workplace. But the purpose of having a policy is that it's implemented. So as Karen did mention during the session, there's no point in having a policy if nobody does anything with it, or, you know, it doesn't actually work. So it's definitely worth having a look at that and making sure it's up to scratch for your practice.
Does anyone have any questions about, menopause in the workplace generally? Because I'm conscious that that was focused on kind of the champion role, and not everybody wants to take that role. Does anyone have any general questions about menopause at work? Quite a lot today, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, I know they've got no microphones, unfortunately, but here's one question. Not a question, but I would like to thank you for highlighting that age is always older and that we can be experiencing perimenopause and early menopause. So I think Amy means not always older. Yeah. So yeah, it can start from a younger age. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And anecdotally, I don't have the figures to hand to back this up, but it's starting early. It's starting earlier in women, for lots of biological and evolutionary reasons. So, there can be literally a 35-year-old woman in your practice who is having the worst perimenopausal symptoms, but maybe she doesn't even know it. So, if you have the right training, you can maybe, instead of it being depression or stress or burnout or whatever it may be called, it's just that, it could be this. If you understand the symptoms, it could be this. Use a symptom track and work out for yourself, or go see GP. Because the more women I speak to, I would say maybe 1 in 10 of my clients is under 40. So that's not a lot in itself, but people are recognizing that perhaps it is an issue for younger women that needs dealing with, and we're not done.
Yeah, so Amy said, I think it's helpful in supporting women with hormonal changes, and having more people aware is so helpful. Yeah. I think on one of the previous webinars, actually, somebody mentioned that I think it was our manager or somebody else in our practice hadn't really been able to empathise because she hadn't had any symptoms herself. And so Karen did mention that, it's not just about educating people who might not have experienced it yet, or, men or whatever, that some women don't understand either because they haven't had the same symptoms or have had the same effect on them. So it's definitely worth getting more people.
Yeah, and I think more people aware. A point that I'd really like to make is that it doesn't have to be a big thing in terms of time, in terms of cost, in terms of resources. It's just, it's that awareness piece and those conversations. And if you don't want to do formal training on it, that's fine, but just find the resources that will educate. A poster in the canteen or kitchen or whatever it is, that just signpost that this could be going on and that there is somebody to talk to if you need it.
Yeah. Somebody's mentioned that they think GPs need to be more aware when women present with depression, etc., as they don't often consider perimenopause. Yeah. I tell you, a big one for me was anxiety, and I just didn't understand where it had came from. And my mum said that she, had the same thing. So somebody else was saying that their own GP tried to prescribe antidepressants and they were refused.
Unfortunately, I hear that much more than I'd like to, and it's very often in the younger age group. And the awareness amongst GPs is, how can I put it, varying, shall we say. So there are some GPs out there, and there's some menopause nurse specialists that are absolutely brilliant. But the education that they get through their training isn't good enough. If they've been practicing for 30 years, then it's outdated anyway. So it's often down to them to update themselves and have the right training. But you will get the best outcomes from your GP if you know your symptoms, and you use a symptom tracker so that you can see what's going on. Because you might think it's hot flashes, then you look down the symptom tracker and go, oh yes, I've got anxiety. Oh yes, I've got tinnitus, or I've got thinning hair, or I've got eczema, or whatever the symptom might be. And then you go to your GP and say, I think it's perimenopause, and he has to convince himself and you that it's not, before he gives you antidepressants. So yeah, I mean, well done for saying no to it, but just go back and and if you do want HRT, tell them.
Well, somebody's asked, where can you get a symptom tracker?
You can download them from loads of websites. I've got one that I can, if it's all right with you, Helen, I'll send through to you, and you can just provide it or put it on If anybody wants to follow me, I'm not selling it, it's all free. My handle on Instagram is menopause_health. So there's all sorts of resources on there, from symptom trackers to how to deal with your GP, all sorts of stuff. So please go and have a look on there. But I'll give you a copy of my symptom tracker, Helen.
Yeah, if you send it to me, I can distribute it to everybody who's joined today. Yeah, well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I don't want to overrun, because I know people have, it's over lunchtime and things. So somebody said Menopause Charity has a good one, the trackers are useful. So yeah, you can just Google it. There's loads of things on Instagram.
There is loads.
Yeah.
But when you're tracking, I know we've run out of time. When you're tracking, don't just track the symptoms, but track when they occur and what the triggers might be, because then you can start finding those solutions. So trigger might be red wine, or trigger might be meetings at work, or trigger might be the dog, whatever it is, that will help you find the right solutions for yourself.
Okay. Well, we don't seem to have any more questions, Karen. We're going to wrap it up now. I'm going to stop the recording. But yeah, if anybody's got any questions or wants to know more about training or policies and things, then please just drop us a message. And good luck with everything for the future. So thank you very much, Karen. Lots of thank you.
Thank you. Sorry we were a bit late. I'm sorry I had to rush a bit, but hopefully
no, it's fine. Thank you.